Hi guys, welcome to eCoreAcademy. My name is Aastha Kulkarni and I am the teacher here for the English 1 course at eCore. I'm coming at you guys with a new video. It's my first lesson actually, and it's going to be a grammar lesson on fragments and run-on sentences, if you can't already tell. So before we get started, I just want to remind you guys that if you're liking this content, like the video, comment down below, share it with friends and family, and then subscribe to help eCoreAcademy out. And then without further ado, let's just get started. So let me begin with what a fragment is actually. A fragment is a group of words that fails to express a complete thought while being punctuated as a complete sentence. So in other words, it's basically a group of words that's forming to be a sentence. And many people get confused if a fragment is actually a sentence because it'll have a period at the end or a comma somewhere in the middle, and people will see that punctuation and automatically assume, oh, that's a sentence. When in reality, it's just a fragment posing to be a sentence. Every sentence needs a complete subject and it needs a complete predicate. Fragments only contain one of these. So whether it be either a subject or a predicate, fragments usually only contain one of these, and that makes them a fragment. In other words, a fragment is an incomplete sentence. It's a group of words posing to be a sentence. I chose this picture here at the bottom because I think it's a really good visual to kind of understand a fragment. As you guys know, a puzzle is incomplete with just one piece. You need multiple pieces to make a good puzzle. So I like to think of a fragment as that one piece of a puzzle, and when you group 2, 3, 4 pieces of that puzzle together, you're going to get a really, really, really nice sentence. So just think of fragments as a puzzle piece. So let's move on to some examples of fragments. Let's start with the first one. The answer to our prayers. A fragment like this raises the questions to the readers saying, who is the answer to our prayers? What is the answer to our prayers? A statement like this leaves people confused, and as we can probably assume, the thing missing from this fragment is a subject. Perhaps the workers of African descent. Again, what are we trying to put across? Perhaps the workers of African descent what? What are they trying to do? Perhaps what? Or maybe what are you describing about them? Fragments, as I've said before, they express incomplete thoughts. And we can already see in these two examples, the readers are often left feeling quite lost and confused as to what that sentence was trying to put across, or in this case, fragment. Before they went to the movies. Now, this fragment would be probably used before or after another sentence because it's kind of a transitional phrase into a different sentence. So we can tell this is a fragment because we are asking ourselves what happened before the movies, or what did they do before the movies, something like that. Leaving his family at a time when they needed him. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on this one. I just want to point out that just because a fragment is a little bit more long or lengthy, it looks a little bit longer, it has more words, that does not mean that it's a sentence. There is no certain number of words or amount of lines that it needs to take up to qualify as a sentence. So a fragment can be a super detailed, super, super long fragment, but still have no substance or still doesn't express a complete thought. So this one may confuse people because at first glance, reading it may seem like, hey, that's a complete sentence. But you really have to look back, and in this case, we're missing a subject. Leaving his family at a time when they needed him. Who left their family at a time when they needed him? So again, don't be fooled by the length of a fragment. You really need to focus on what the content is in the fragment in order to decide if it is actually a fragment or if it's a sentence. And then lastly, Remy, who said that her room was too small for her. Again, this one confuses people because it has a comma in it. I think it's just human nature to assume that if a sentence has a comma or a period, people will just make an assumption that it's a sentence. But in fact, this is just a fragment with an extra punctuation mark. So Remember, we want to keep in mind this fragment raises questions such as Remy, who said that her room was too small for her, what did she say? That's what we're asking ourselves after we read this. And if you find yourself asking a question after you read a sentence, then it's probably not a sentence. If you're left wondering what that was supposed to mean, then in most cases, it was probably a fragment. So let's talk a little bit about how to fix fragments. These are the three main techniques that I've found work best for fixing fragments, usually in any and most cases. So we'll start with number one. The first technique is to add a subject or verb to complete the thought. So this is like the most common scenario is a fragment will just be missing a subject or a verb. So adding a subject or a verb, again, is just a super quick fix. So those two questions, which is who is the subject, or what is happening, like a verb, what is happening in that fragment to make it a sentence. So this is the first technique I would say is the most used as well. To fix a fragment, simply just tag on a subject or tag on a verb, beginning or end, it doesn't matter as long as it makes sense. Number two, attach the fragment to the sentence before or after it, if it makes sense to do so. You want to really keep in mind what it says in the parentheses, if it makes sense to do so. If you attach it to a sentence before or after, you have to make sure that the content still matches. So, and usually it depends, but if you are going to attach it to a sentence, you want to make sure that if it needs to, you add a comma after that sentence to kind of introduce that fragment that you're adding into it. So you just want to be mindful of things like that, making sure that the content still makes sense. Obviously, if you have a sentence about like someone eating pizza and then your fragment is about chocolate, it wouldn't really make sense to attach the fragment to a sentence that is not related to it. So again, if it makes sense to do so, this is also a really quick and easy fix to incorporate those fragments of little information that you still want in whatever you're writing, whether it be an essay, just for recreation, an article, journal entry, whatever it is. It's a really easy way to just incorporate some random blurbs that you had thought of in your head. And then the last solution would be to drop or replace certain words within the fragment. This one is especially useful for a fragment that is particularly lengthy. It already has a lot of substance, but it's just missing one word, or if you just get rid of one word, it'll be a sentence. So again, as I said earlier, usually fragments either have a subject or a verb, but there are some fragments that do have both, but they still do not express a complete thought. That is why they're still a fragment. So this third technique is helpful for fragments that have both a subject and a verb, but they still do not express a complete thought. So let's take a look at those examples I had showed previously, and let's make some corrections together so you guys understand how to use those three techniques that we just talked about. So these are going to be our revised fragments. So our first fragment, previously, it was just the answer to our prayers. What we did here is we utilized the first technique, which was to add a subject or verb. So we added both in this case, subject and a helping verb. So we added he was to make this sentence complete. Adding that subject and verb clears up the question of who was doing what. So he was the answer to our prayers. He was being the answer to our prayers. So that clears up the first one using the first technique. The second example also is using the first solution that we talked about, which is adding a subject or verb. This one only adds a verb and it still makes a complete sentence, which is completely okay. So if you don't remember the original fragment, it was perhaps the workers of African descent. Now, if we wanted to really emphasize that the workers were of African descent, we can simply add that helping verb of were in there. So that way we are emphasizing what the workers were like. So simply adding that verb makes it a complete sentence, and now it reads, perhaps the workers were of African descent. So now that's a complete thought. We know what descent the workers were of. And now we can make another sentence talking about what they're doing. My apologies. This third one, If you don't remember, the previous fragment was just this white part, which is before they went to the movies. So this is using the second technique, which is just attaching it to a sentence that's before or after it. So in this case, this is the sentence before. Say the sentence before it was Paul bought popcorn. And then you wanted to say before they went to the movies was your fragment. You can simply tag that on at the end of it. You don't need a comma or anything because it makes sense without a comma. So then the sentence would just read, Paul bought popcorn before they went to the movies. So it's as simple as that. Paul bought popcorn is still a sentence. You add that fragment to it, and it's just making a longer, more detailed sentence. Our fourth example was leaving his family at a time when they needed him. Now, this is also going to be using our second solution, which is attaching the fragment to the sentence before or after it. In this case, this is going to be attaching it to the sentence after it. In most cases, when you attach a fragment to the sentence after it, you will need a comma, but if it works without a comma, that's also a possibility. You just want to make sure, grammar check and make sure that it makes sense, but in this case, we do need a comma. So now the sentence is going to be, leaving his family at a time when they needed him, Rex disappointed everyone. Without it, Rex disappointed everyone is still a sentence, but when we're adding that previous fragment onto it, it just makes, as I said before, an even longer, more detailed, more cohesive sentence. Now let's take a look at our last example, number 5. As you can see, nothing is highlighted here. That is because we used the third technique, which is to drop or replace certain words or punctuation within the fragment. So the previous fragment read, Remy, comma, who said that her room was too small for her. So who said that her room was too small for her would be describing Remy, and then after that you would be expected to add another comma and then say something about Remy in order to complete that sentence. But for example, if you didn't want to do that, you could simply get rid of the comma who after Remy, and then the sentence would just read, Remy said that her room was too small for her. I just want you guys to be careful because this does not work for every single sentence. Obviously, if the main point you weren't trying to put across was that she said her room was too small for her, this technique wouldn't necessarily work. But if that was still a detail you wanted to put across, then you can simply, as I said before, get rid of that comma who, and then it would just read as a sentence instead of a fragment. Hopefully you guys are getting the hang of some of these fragments, so let's move on to run-on sentences. Run-on sentences are a combination of 2 or more sentences which are acting as a single sentence. So it can be 2, 3, 4 sentences, whatever amount it is. Basically, they're all fused together with or without commas, it doesn't matter, but they're all fused together and they act as a single sentence because there's only one period at the end of it. So these are usually created due to incorrect punctuation, as I just said, either a lack of period or a semicolon. So run-on sentences are usually an easy fix if you just get your punctuation down. And this is kind of contrary to what I said about the fragments. As I said, fragments don't always have to be short, they can be long. Contrary to that, run-on sentences do not always have to be lengthy, they can be short as well. So you just want to make sure you're looking at the actual content within it and not deciding if something is a fragment or run-on based on the length, the visual length of that group of words. So as we did for fragments, let's just take a look at some examples of run-on sentences, and then we'll go over, again, 3 techniques on how to fix them, and then we'll apply those techniques to our examples I'm showing right now. All right. Our first example is Japan, located in Asia, is an island country. Its capital is Tokyo. Now, as you can see, this is a run-on sentence. A little test I like to do is called the question test. Basically, you take your sentence and you form it into a question. And if your question is asking like more than one question, then it's usually a run-on sentence. So I'll demonstrate with this one. So let's ask ourselves a question based on this sentence. Our question would be, what is Japan? Japan is an island country. You may be wondering, why didn't I say where is Japan located? Because located in Asia is in commas, that means that it's just describing the subject before it. So it's not the actual point that this sentence is trying to put across. It's just a mere extra detail about Japan. So our question would be, what is Japan? And the answer would be, it is an island country. That is one question. However, as you can see, we have this little extra bit that says its capital is Tokyo. We wouldn't be able to incorporate that into our question, so we would have two questions. It would be, what is Japan and what is its capital? So as you can see, this sentence failed the question test, which means that it is more than likely a run-on sentence. And later we'll go over how to fix this. Let's move on to our second example. Some people put hummus on falafel, others enjoy it plain. Now, at first glance, many people actually might think that this is a sentence. There's nothing wrong with it, it's not a run-on. But I'll go over why it is a run-on and why people tend to think that sentences like this aren't run-ons. And then lastly, we have studies show that excess amounts of turmeric can be harmful. Household remedies say otherwise. I don't know if you could tell, but as I was reading that, you can kind of see where the natural pause or the natural period should be in that sentence. So another quick test that you can do is just simply read your sentence out loud. If it feels like it's kind of dragging on, you're rambling on, it's not ending where it should be, or you're not taking a pause where you feel like you should, then it is probably a run-on sentence or it has some punctuation errors. So as you can tell, I probably should have taken a pause after harmful, but instead I just went straight from harmful to household remedies say otherwise, and it kind of dragged on, and you could tell with your ears that it is a run-on sentence. So let's go over some of these quick solutions that we can do to fix run-on sentences. Again, we have 1, 2, and 3 solutions. The first one, as was for the fragments, is probably the most common and easy quick fix for fixing run-ons. So the first one says to separate two sentences using capitalization and end punctuation. So basically, you're changing that one super long sentence that you have and breaking it down into two sentences, which makes it flow a little bit better, and also just makes it not so kind of like rambling on. So that is like the easiest fix. You just chop the sentence in half, add a period somewhere, and then continue on with your next one. Of course, by capitalizing the first letter. The second solution would be to use a conjunction preceded by a comma. So basically, you would use some of the examples that I've listed below. They're not limited to this. There's tons of other conjunctions, but I just found these to be the most easy transition or easy conjunctions that are the most common as well. So you can use but, and, yet, or, because, since, while, or unless, and obviously more. And you would just use one of those conjunctions, you'd put a comma before it, and then after you would add that somewhere in between your sentence to make it more cohesive. Lastly, it says to insert a semicolon with or without a transition word following the semicolon. So some examples of semicolons would be however, hence, therefore, after, next, despite, and also. Obviously, there's more, but this is probably a least common one. I found that high school students and elders or older, they tend to shy away from semicolons, but I personally think that semicolons are a really quick and easy fix for run-on sentences. So I'm going to demonstrate how to use a semicolon so that way you guys don't find it so intimidating or annoying to use semicolons. So again, let's go back and let's revise those previous run-on sentences examples that we had. So our first example was Japan, located in Asia, is an island country. Its capital is Tokyo. So that was our original run-on sentence. So for this one, we're going to be using the first technique, which is to separate the two sentences using capitalization and end punctuation. So as you can see, we kind of just broke off the sentence in this area, so we made it into two sentences. So it would be, Japan, located in Asia, is an island country, period. Its capital is Tokyo. So as you can see, we have now two very informative sentences that don't run on with each other. And it's important to make sure that you capitalize the first letter after you break it into two sentences, because again, this is going to be the start of a new sentence, and we always capitalize the first letter of a sentence. The second example, we're going to be using our second solution, which was to use a conjunction preceded by a comma. So the original of this sentence was, some people put hummus on falafel, others enjoy it plain. And there was no comma in this sentence. So what we can do to make this not a run-on sentence is simply do a comma and then our conjunction, which in this case we used while, and we would just put that after falafel. So it would read, some people put hummus on falafel, while others enjoy it plain. So now instead of just saying everything in one line, this also adds kind of a contrast between the two and accentuates the fact that there's differences between some people. In this case, some people like hummus on falafel and some people don't. And then our last example is going to be using our third technique, which is to insert a semicolon with and following that semicolon with or without a transition word. So in this case, as you can see by the highlighted words, we use the transition word however, because that just made the most sense in this sentence. But if you are having trouble finding a transition word that works, you can simply Google some and just read the sentence aloud in your head, kind of see what fits and what doesn't, and then decide from there. So the original sentence was, studies show that excess amounts of turmeric can be harmful, comma, household remedies say otherwise. So in order to make this a little bit more, make more sense, we can simply add a semicolon after harmful, so that would be one sentence, and then after that, household remedies say otherwise. To make a more contrast between that, we could simply tag on however, comma, before that. So now the sentence would be, studies show that excess amounts of turmeric can be harmful, however, household remedies say otherwise. And now we have two sentences that make sense rather than our kind of lengthy rambling on sentence from before. And now these run-on sentences are just regular sentences. So before I let you guys leave me, we're going to try just two more quick examples, one of a fragment and one of a run-on sentence. And it's kind of just going to break down what we've learned and kind of just seal in those techniques that we've just talked about. More examples. So this one, as we can tell, it's a fragment because it reads, wondered about when life would go back to normal. Who wondered about when life would go back to normal? What wondered about when life would go back to normal? What's the subject? We don't know. That's how we know that it's a fragment, because it does not have a subject. It does have a predicate, but not a subject. Again, this is a fragment. Who wondered? So a fix to this would just be simply our first technique from the fragments to add a subject or verb. In this case, we would only need to add a subject because it does already have a verb. Wondered would be the verb. So we're simply just adding students, the subject, on, and then it would read, students wondered about when life would go back to normal. It's as simple as that. Our second example, the light bulb is an invention that is necessary to use on a daily basis. It is still possible to live without them. As you can see, there is a comma there. However, it's still a run-on sentence. So there's no conjunction there, which is really necessary for this sentence to flow. So a quick fix would just be to simply add a conjunction. Comma but is like the most simple combination if you're trying to fix a run-on. So we just tagged on the comma but after basis, and now the sentence would be, the light bulb is an invention that is necessary to use on a daily basis, comma, but it is still possible to live without them. So adding the conjunction would be the second technique that we talked about for run-on sentences. And as you can see, now we have two beautiful sentences, not a fragment, not a run-on, just two good sentences. So I'm really glad that if you guys stuck to the end, and I hope you learned something new. If you've been having trouble with run-on sentences and fragments and how to fix them, I hope this made your life a little bit easier and you learned some new techniques that you didn't know about. Before you guys leave, once again, I just want to ask you to like this video, comment down below if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to eCore, share with friends. These are all of our socials. You can check in the description box below if you want to check out our website as well. That would be greatly appreciated. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in our next English 1 lesson.